Have you ever watched a movie that just spoke to you? Maybe you don't even know why, but you watched it and it resonated you in a way that you can't even describe. It might be a movie that you even take with you for the rest of your life. One that you look back and quote on, or one you can even say was made for you. Now, have you ever forgotten about it? Just completely gone. Like, you never even watched it at all. Maybe you didn't want to forget about it, maybe it's just life. It got in the way. The unstoppable march of time just kept going and going and going. Life just became too much. Maybe it was relationships, maybe it was new hobbies or work. Everything clouded whatever memory you had of this film, and it's just gone. Every now and then you might see something or hear something that kind of reminds you of something you might have seen a long time ago, but you can't exactly put your finger on why it reminds you of this, or even exactly what it reminds you of. You just know it reminds you of something. That was essentially me. Last week on a plane ride back from New York, I had 5 hours to kill. And so I used the free movie services that the airline provided. I figured I might as well watch something new that I haven't seen or watch a classic, I don't know, one or the other. Just anything to distract me for 5 hours. And then I saw it. And I was kind of taken aback. It was a movie called Big Fish. And just like that scene from Ratatouille, all the memories came flooding back. I remember the summer right before freshman year of high school, I watched this movie and I had to do a report on it. And that's kind of all it really was. I remember thinking it was interesting, but I honestly don't really remember a whole lot about it. And yet, it engraved itself in my mind for years. For some reason, my brain was telling me that this movie would be important, but maybe I just didn't realize it yet. So it stuck with me. Every now and then, I'd see something or watch something that would take me back to that moment, but I wouldn't really remember why. But it all made sense in my mind the minute I saw the title of the film. And so, I turned it on, and I watched the whole movie. And I realized why this movie lingered in my mind for so many years. 4 years later, as a high school graduate, I now watch this film with a completely different outlook. And it was just amazing. For those of you who know nothing or have no idea what I'm talking about, Big Fish recounts the life of Edward Bloom, a very outgoing, romantic, and just overall charismatic guy. His stories are just so fantastical with elements that seem so unbelievable, but they are just so much fun to listen to because, well, they're amazing. Whether it was working for the circus or going to war, there was always something just a little bit more over the top about it that made it seem so much more unbelievable. And while this might sound charming, this is also where the problem lies. What is fact and what is fiction? Are the stories just that? Stories? Nothing more? Is this really a retelling of Edward Bloom's life? Or is it just simply make-believe? Something that you'd tell your son before he goes to bed every night? Something to just make the world seem a little bit more interesting. This is where Will Bloom comes in. He is the opposer to his father's stories. He doesn't think that any of this actually happened. He has grown tired of hearing them over and over again. He is here to keep the audience grounded in reality, or what he believes is true. And it is because of these smoke and mirror tricks that Will thinks is going on that puts a strain on his relationship with his father, to the point that, after Will's wedding, he cuts his dad out of his life entirely.
How can you not understand that?
I'm sorry to embarrass you.
You're embarrassing yourself, Dad. You just don't see it.
Several years go by, and life goes on. For a while at least, this decision seems like it was the best one. No more having to hear all the retelling of the stories. No more dealing with his dad, who was always a little bit more absent than he would have liked. However, when Edward falls ill to cancer, Will decides to be there by his father in his last days. This, of course, means he's gonna have to hear some more stories. And while Edward's wife Sandra and Will's wife Josephine both actually like hearing these recounts of these stories, Will is just not entertained. And he hopes and he tries to pry out the real truth from his dad. But Edward holds to it that these stories are true. And it's at this point in the film where we go through the entirety of Edward Bloom's life. From his time in a small town where basically everybody loved him and he was great at everything, to when he literally took a beating for the love of his life.
Come on.
I mean, you love this guy?
He's almost a stranger and I prefer him to you.
It is so fun to see just how many characters that he meets along the way. I mean, he literally meets a werewolf. Like, how much crazier can it get? Even from the earliest days when he looked into the eye of a witch and saw how he was going to die. He has made every moment of his life a spectacle. I think we all know that Ewan McGregor is a talented actor, but this is truly to me one of my favorite roles that he has done. He really brings this kind of somehow small town but also larger than life persona that kind of falls into the same category as like Frank Abagnale from Catch Me If You Can, or like Forrest Gump himself. Like, they all have this giant spectacle to them because they have all done so much themselves. They have all fallen into this category of legend. But it's that word that drives us back to the center point. What if, as amazing as all these stories are, they are only just legend? Will, throughout the film, expresses multiple times that despite having a father all of his life, he barely knows him. Edward wasn't around a lot during Will's childhood, and when he was, he would tell them these stories. However, as you grow older, you start to notice little inconsistencies here and there, and stuff that starts to seem childlike. This can't be true. It's just too insane for it to be. And as Will grew older, so did his disdain for these stories. He knew his dad for more as a party trick than he did as an actual person. For example, when I first watched it back in the summer right before freshman year, I probably only paid attention to Edward Bloom's story. All the stuff is the stuff that you are going to remember long term. It's the big spectacle of it. This is the stuff that you're going to look back with those rose-tinted glasses. Those ones that just kind of encapsulate the vibe of Big Fish. This is all spectacle though. But spectacle distracts us from reality. As great as these aspects of Edward's life seem, there's some parts that weren't so great. Like his relationship with Will. Will is embarrassed of his dad. More so than that, he is tired of him. People love him, he's charismatic, they all want to hear him. And he's always there to tell stories, but he's never there to be an actual father. And watching it now, it's a sad reality that makes you sympathize a lot more with Will. Not just as someone who's there to clash with his father, but as someone who just wants to know the truth of his father. As Edward tells all these crazy, adventurous stories time and time again, Will's not in them. He's not in the picture at all. Even at Will's own wedding, Edward manages to steal the attention by once again using his spectacle of his stories. Not even for one day can Will have his own story to tell, because his father has clouded it, and just like usual, he's left out of the picture. It's easy to get distracted by all the noise of Edward Bloom's stories, but eventually once the smoke fades away, all is revealed once again and we're back in reality, with a son who is displeased and a father who will die a mystery man.
Come on, Will. Everyone loves that story.
No, Dad, they don't. I don't love that story. Not anymore. Not after 1,000 times.
What, a father's not allowed to talk about his son?
I'm a footnote in that story, Dad. I'm the context for your great adventure. For one night in your entire life, the universe did not revolve around Edward Bloom.
To me, this relationship is what makes the movie so much more, because for all we know, this life never even happened. However, here's the thing. Even lies have to be built off of some sort of truth. As Will begins to clean out some of his dad's stuff, he finds trinkets and remnants of his life. Stuff from the war. Stuff that is mentioned in his stories. All of a sudden, Will is now wondering if maybe these could be true, after all. As we dive deeper and deeper into the film, the more fantastical and insane elements of it slowly chip away, and a bit more realism is added to the overall Edward Bloom story. He remains happily married. He restores an old town that was once extremely welcoming to him, and he paid a visit to someone he promised he would see. Jenny herself is a living example of the legends coming to life, but even in her words, all of it seemed like just a fairy tale, especially her love for him, in which she would never reciprocate because he only loved one woman. When Will returns, he finds out the awful news that his father is now in the hospital. He's not in good condition and he doesn't have a lot longer to live. As Will lays there by his bed, all he can hear is Edward saying that this is not how he goes out, that he saw into the witch's eye that one fateful day and he knew how his death would be. But in order to get it, he would need Will's help. So, just like his father, Will tells his own story. A story where all of his friends that he had helped or he had met along his journey in life all came to see him go. He's placed into the water where he quite literally becomes the big fish. Throughout the film, Edward tells us about the big fish, the one that could not be caught. It was untamable, it was free, it was so ambitious that it would remain a legend forever and would be told in stories. But by the end of the film, in Edward Bloom's funeral that is told through his son, Edward himself becomes the big fish. He's quite literally the legend that he had retold time and time again. Edward himself has always been a big fish. His small town couldn't keep him for very long. He was too ambitious. And time again when he was offered to stay, he was never able to make that full commitment because he wanted to do so much more.
This town is more than any man could ask for, but the truth is, I'm just not ready to end up anywhere.
He never gave up because he was so determined. He literally went after somebody else's girl just because he knew that he wanted to marry her. And it worked. Edward Bloom is a force that cannot be contained to any single pond. He himself has become a legend. And just like his father, at the very end of the film, Will can be seen telling the stories to his son, describing the uncatchable and relentless man that was Edward Bloom. But there's more. Here's the thing. At Edward Bloom's actual funeral, multiple people from the stories that he told actually exist. And they show up, recounting some of their experiences with Edward themselves. But it's not quite what it seems. Sure, the people are there, and even their personalities are probably the same, but they're not exactly like they were all described to be. Even Will himself is shocked that these stories, in some way, were still true. They may not have been as fantastical as they were made out to be, but maybe that was the point. Maybe when Will was told them as a kid, it's how Will saw them. I love this moment because it gives you both answers. While no, not every single aspect of the stories were true, they also were at the same time. Some of these people really existed, and they have become legend themselves, just like Edward Bloom. Big Fish was one of those movies that hit me deeper than I think other movies have. The duality of both perspectives of the stories is one that I really appreciate because with all the spectacle that Edward Bloom has to offer, ultimately we fall back to the reality, which even by itself doesn't have to be as bland as Will might have made it out to be. In the beginning of the film, we see Will in this mundane office job, and there really doesn't seem to be much excitement in his life overall. It just looks like he's going through the motions, and even when his dad is diagnosed, he's more so trying to pry a sort of truth out of him that he already got. Exaggerated, sure, but ultimately still have truth to them. Perhaps Edward Bloom could have been a better dad. Maybe he got caught up in all this ambition to the point that he might have lost sight of what really mattered. Despite Edward knowing that his son mattered a lot to him, he could have showed it more. But Will himself also lost a little bit of the excitement and spark that makes life so much more worth living. What Big Fish is really trying to tell you is that even though our lives aren't like fairy tales where amazing things happen to us all the time, it's always a matter of perspective. Even a smallest little moment in your life, whether it's spending time with your friends or family, finding someone you love in your life, creating something, finding a new hobby, anything, this will create a story worth telling. And even though sometimes we can look at things with rose-tinted glasses, is that always a bad thing? Often nostalgia is described with the same phrase of rose-tinted glasses, where we might not be as critical or as fair to it because we have this deeper connection with a film, product, whatever. But is it wrong to look at something with this perspective just because maybe you grew up with it? Sometimes I don't really think so. I think it's okay to have those rose-tinted glasses on every now and then. It's okay to not be critical about some of your favorite things or favorite movies just because everybody else is. But that's just what I think. Big Fish is a timeless classic. Despite having this early 2000s feel to it, as well as being a certain movie set within a certain time, it is as timeless as it could possibly be. Its message overall is one I think everybody should hear once in their life because it resonated with me, and I think it'll resonate with you guys too. Whether you're watching it to get caught up in the spectacle of Edward Bloom's life, or you're there for the more grounded story of a father and son, Big Fish is a movie worth watching for the first time. Or if you've already seen it, rewatch it again, because it might hit you in a way that you didn't expect. It's good to be back, YouTube. I will probably post more. But as always, like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if there's an old movie I should revisit. But, for now, I'll catch you all next time.